It's amazing, especially in light of what we just saw with Darius, the power of the human spirit to be indomitable, to take on challenges that seem like they're impossible, absurd, unreasonable. Yeah. And that's what you guys do. That's what both of you do. You actually look for problems, and you have different ways of talking about them, but they're so similar. I just can't believe you guys don't know each other. It's insane.
We do now.
We do now. Well, it's right. Over.
Yeah,
we got it.
All right. Okay.
Introduction
great.
made.
Okay. But you know, you Daniel, you talk about unfortunate opportunity, and you talk about Mick. You talk about the absurd. Mick, why don't you start off and talk about what you mean by an absurd problem and how you approach it?
Sure. So one thing is absolutely certain, that I am clearly the least educated person in this room, right? And we embrace that within the ethos of our company and how we operate, is that we look for things that you see as a human being. Your qualifications and the credentials are that you breathe air and pump blood, right? And that you see something and you say, wait a second, that just doesn't make sense. And that could be a whole myriad of different things, and we're tackling a lot of different things, but we call those absurdities. When you see it and you just kind of scratch your head and say, why is that? That shouldn't be that way. And so that's how we define what is an absurdity. And then what we do, our process is we dogpile on that with a bunch of, just different, we call them misfit geniuses. It's artists, it's architects, it's doctors, it's physicists, it's all different people who don't have a dog in the fight in terms of why it should be solved or using their tech or their solution. It's just the absurdity the human absurdity that needs to be solved. And that's, I think, why we've been successful at it, because we create this egoless attack plan at solving whatever it is we're trying to accomplish.
So I want to follow up, because I want to give people a sense of what we mean by this. So talk a little bit about your first origin story. I know you've got a couple of origin stories, but the temp story. Tell us just really kind of a little abridged version of that.
Yeah, the 30-second summary is, I didn't know that people who had ALS or any kind of trapped-in syndrome, I didn't know that the Stephen Hawking device that you see on YouTube or on television, I thought that was ubiquitous. I thought everybody had that. And so I met a paralyzed graffiti artist who had been lying motionless in a bed for 7 years talking through a piece of paper, a letterboard. And to me, that was just, he was in Los Angeles. We've got a GNP greater than most developing nations, and there's a dude talking through a piece of paper. And so we kind of went through this. We didn't know, Not Impossible wasn't a thing at that time. I just said, that's effed, we got to change that. We jumped on it, brought a bunch of people together, and we created a device called the Eyewriter, which is, I believe in locally grown sustainable produce, and Venice Beach, locally grown sustainable produce is cheap sunglasses. So we took a bunch of cheap sunglasses and we duct tape a wire to it, bent it around to the front, cracked open an old web camera, focused it back on the pupil, and the web camera tracked the pupil, so as he would move his eyes back and forth, he could draw on the screen again. And so we did it, we gave it to him, he loved it, we all went home, went back to our day jobs, and then we woke up one day and it was Time Magazine's top 50 inventions of the year. And we said, maybe we should try this again.
Yeah. So just to follow up on that temp, who was an amazing graffiti artist, you actually not only taught him how to write and communicate, but also how to paint again, how to do graffiti again, which was another.
Well, I didn't teach him, because I can barely draw a stick figure, but I just gave him the ability to manifest what he had in his head. He lost his ability to move his limbs, but he didn't lose his creativity. And so we do this on a bunch of different things. It's about channeling what the potential the human has and just giving them access to that through a means that they didn't have beforehand.
Wow. Daniel, you have talked about this power of entrepreneurship, which for you is sort of a channeling of that human spirit. Tell us, you said, I believe, that there is no single problem or most single problems can't be solved without entrepreneurship.
Yeah. I just have to first say, Darius, that was incredible. That was mind-blowing, so thank you for that. I was talking to a friend recently just about entrepreneurs, why we believe so much in entrepreneurs, and perfect example, right? Where most of the world sees market failures and sees issues and problems, entrepreneurs have a curiously warped perspective, right? We look at the same thing, you see a market opportunity and a solution. but there are millions of great ideas, right? And I would actually argue that at least here in the United States, there's not a shortage of capital either. What there is a dearth of is courage. And it takes a lot to jump off the career track and to give everything you have and risk everything that you could have because you want to will something into existence that hasn't existed before in the history of humankind. We believe so much in entrepreneurs because they're not afraid to do that. And that journey as an entrepreneur is, and there's a lot of entrepreneurs here, is incredibly lonely. And it is incredibly hard, and the odds are stacked against you. And if you're an entrepreneur who is not just creating a business, to optimize ad revenue, but you're trying to solve a key crisis in healthcare, or you're trying to bring education to 300 million people who don't have it, or you're trying to ensure that the 700 million people who are illiterate can read, whatever that might be, if that's your end goal, that's just a lonely, hard path to travel down. And our organization at Unreasonable, it's just the biggest privilege in the world to be able to support entrepreneurs on that journey as they try to go after these hard problems. And
just to put some money where your mouth is here, you've raised, your businesses have raised $2.1 billion, and you operate in 163 countries?
So we support, so one of the reasons we also believe in entrepreneurs is we've seen it, right. In the real world. So we support 180 growth equity CEOs. That data is actually a little outdated. Our site's outdated. They're measurably impacting lives about 300 million individuals across nearly every country and territory in the world. They've raised over $3 billion in equity, generated over $3 billion in revenue. But the impact on people is what matters. And 180 individuals had an idea, had the courage to bring it into market, and in turn have impacted over 300 million lives. That's why we believe in entrepreneurs.
Mick, you actually have such a unique perspective in problem solving, which you call crowd solving often. But you really talk about this, help one, help many. And you're always asking, who is the one? And when I heard you talk about that, I thought, is this a line from The Matrix? Who is the one? Because I knew it sounded familiar, but tell us what you mean by that.
So I came into this, like I said, it wasn't with an intent. After the Tempt experience and the Eyewriter experience, we said, all right, this whole hacking technology to help people, there's something there, we got to keep going. And so we didn't have a pot of money to invest. And so for us, you use the tools that you have been blessed with. And as a filmmaker and as a producer, I knew how to tell stories. And looking at how to scale, you can chuck a wad of money at something, or you can tell an amazing story. But if we tell an amazing story about malaria, or poverty, or hunger, or things like that, there's a distance that we have as human beings to an issue that you think is insurmountable. And so our whole approach on this is, if you're going to talk about hunger, let's not tell the story of hunger, let's tell the story of one person. And so what we do and how we attack all of our problems is that we solve a problem for one person, and we focus all of our energy in solving that problem for that one person. We tell the story powerfully about that one person. And in doing so, what it gives, it grants the access for people to now relate to that person because maybe they had a brother or a son or a father or a mother, whatever. So there's a chance to relate to that person as a human being where they might not have had a passion about whatever that issue is otherwise. And that all of a sudden starts to propel it. And it gives people the ability to say, well, wait a second, maybe I can do something, or maybe that solution could apply to whatever it is. So we basically did it because we were too poor to do it any other way.
And just to focus this, on one person, Daniel. So Daniel was a kid in the war-torn area of Liberia? Sudan. Yeah. And you read something about him in Time magazine, and you decided, okay, I'm going to build limbs for him. And so you went and did that. So I watched the video of this, and it's absolutely extraordinary. You flew in on a prop plane with a 3D printer and some plastic and some laptops, and you just built a prosthetic for both of his arms. And it's incredible. So you've used that story to tell.
And the key thing about that is that, yes, we solved it for him. Yeah. And yes, it was the world's first 3D printing prosthetic lab. But the important thing was that when I got on the plane, I left, he was able to feed himself. It was this incredible emotional moment. when we got on the plane to fly back, by the time we had planes, trains, and automobile back to Los Angeles, they had made 3 other arms. The villagers had made 3 other arms for other people there. So that's the help one, help many.
That's unbelievable. Yeah, that's just incredible.
Awesome.
Talking about origin stories, Daniel, you know, yours is a quote from George Bernard Shaw. Yeah. You know, you want to tell us what the quote is?
Yeah. I will rationalize a seemingly irrational name, which is why Unreasonable. The 19th century playwright George Bernard Shaw, he's kind of our patron saint in a way, but he's famous for saying that the reasonable man adapts himself to the world, the unreasonable one persists in adapting the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable person. And our belief, if George Bernard Shaw is right, if all progress depends on unreasonable people, then in the world we live in, where 1.2 billion of us don't have access to electricity, 4.5 billion of us don't have access to modern medicine or surgical devices, 250 million girls live on less than $2.50 a day. Like in the world we live in today, if progress depends on reasonable people, we can't afford not to bet on them. So we're looking for the Micks, and we're looking for the Kellers. And I just have to also say, I saw Keller's talk with Zipline. It was just so excited about what one person, one team has achieved for an entire country, soon to be continent. And so that's where it comes from. It's a belief that we have to define progress, and we agree with him. We think that individuals and small teams and collectives and communities like this can make a difference.
And what you've both done is you both expanded your mission to different, realms. So, for example, you've done the Not Impossible music or Not Impossible build, and you, Daniel, have done the Unreasonable at Sea and just there's a great quote. Unreasonable at Sea, where you brought all these different entrepreneurs together with some mentors for 11 weeks at sea and said, have at it, right? I mean, what was that like?
It was intense. So we sailed about 40,000 nautical kilometers. We had 11 technology companies, about 50 mentors.
All solving a social problem, though.
Yeah.
Right?
So the reason was, here in the U.S., especially if you have a software platform or an app, if it works, it scales. Right? If you have a healthcare application in Nigeria, if it works, you might be impacting the lives of 10 million people, but it is very hard to scale internationally, let alone transcontinentally. And especially in emerging markets, but I'd say everywhere, empathy builds empires. It's one of our beliefs. And so if you're going to try to take a technology that matters to the world from one country to another, the only way to do it is to go to market and to show up. And so we basically commandeered a ship and sailed around the world, 14 countries. We had mentors like Desmond Tutu and Matt Mullenweg, the founder of WordPress, and the Prince of Saudi, like unbelievable humans who saw the same thing, which is once that solution exists, how do we take it from 1 to 1 billion? And we figured we had to go into market to try to experiment.
So the New York Times wrote about that. If TED Talks and Google Labs copulated and spawned a cruise for the Facebook generation, Unreasonable at Sea would be the would be the result. You got to read the papers, man.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's what they said.
That's awesome.
That's a pretty great quote. Mick, one of the amazing things about this is that people descend on your company, on your home, to help build these projects. They just take it on. There's something infectious about you and your mission, and you can see that kind of excitement, building. And the music one is a great example where people were just so excited to be a part of it. Talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
So everything starts with the absurdity, right? So the absurdity was I saw how the deaf experience music. And they experience music by standing in front of speakers and just receiving all of that low-end sound against your body. Okay, press pause. I live in Venice Beach. I skateboard. My boys and I go skateboard. A friend of ours fell, hit the back of his head, and he lost his sense of smell. He didn't fall on his nose. He hit his head. That was my aha moment. Wait a second, you don't see with your ears, taste with your tongue, smell with your nose. You do that all with your brain, which means you don't hear with your ears. You do that with your brain. So why don't we hack around the ears and get straight to the brain? So we took music and the concept of music, and I'm hyper condensing this process, but we broke music into its separate parts. For simplicity's sake, drum, vocals, bass, guitar, and we projected to wristbands, guitar, ankle bands, drums, whoop, vocal here, bass, the base of your spine. So now we've created a new way for the brain to experience music.
And this is in a suit. These are in wearables.
This is a piece of wearable technology.
Okay.
And so we took it to the deaf community. They lost their minds and said, this is amazing. They actually threatened us.
Yeah.
They threatened us and said, we're not giving this back to you, right?
Right.
We're like, we deserve prototypes.
Yeah.
So then we took it, we didn't know that many deaf people, so we started taking it out to friends that we knew in the music industry, and they said, holy shit, this is the future of music. Now we're all going to hear and feel music in this hyper acute way. And lo and behold, a friend of ours knew a famous jazz pianist named Joe Schiani, who was this incredible pianist who played with the greats, and he had Parkinson's. And he said, send me some of those crazy ass things you're working on. I want to put it on so he can feel music. And we put it on, and our device that was designed to help the deaf, to allow this equality of music for the deaf, it stopped Parkinson's tremors. And we went, wow, oh shit, that's pretty cool.
You know we're live streaming. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. We'll bleep
My mom said just don't drop the F-bomb.
Yeah,
Your mom's right.
We'll fix it in post.
Yeah,
It'll be
perfect.
fine. Yeah, fix it.
So that kind of accidental outcome for us is part of that and now we're pursuing both paths aggressively, really hyper aggressively, and we feel like, okay, if you're blessed with that kind of access to solving these problems, you have to go down those rabbit holes and explore that, because you can't just walk away from that. And so we're really excited about those two companies.
One of the most moving things is I watched the video that you made of the sort of disco, the session that you had where you had deaf people, half deaf and half hearing, at the same, dance club. And everybody was enjoying it together. There was this incredible unity of humanity, and nobody nobody had a disability.
That's just it, is that when you take away the fact that you can hear and I can't, and you take music and we're both going to be receiving it in the same way, you create this music equality, and you now eliminates the segregation of, oh, you can and you can't, and it's now about a shared experience. And that for us was it was a spiritual moment to watch.
Dan, you're 33, right, Daniel?
Yes.
Or is it 33 years old? I mean, it's incredible that you've done everything you've done at 33. You started this at the University of Colorado with a couple of buddies, and have scaled up. What is it about your generation, you think, that sees these kinds of unfortunate, opportunities or absurd events and says, we can fix this?
It's a good question, because I almost want to push back on the question.
Please do.
Because we support 180 companies, and when we started to look across the world and say, we wanted the most effective solutions, age wasn't a thing. Like right now, we have an entrepreneur and a cohort we're working with right now. She's in her 60s, and I think that's a little bit dangerous in some ways to say that it's kind of our generation that's going after it, because then those of us who are my parents' age say, I missed that.
Right.
And can I give one example?
Please.
To make it real? So one of my favorite human beings, her name is Jennifer Holgram, incredible biochemist. She retired. She's going to move into the Colorado Rockies with her husband, and then she got a call from a scientist in New Zealand, and she basically said she couldn't turn it back on the technology. In essence, we ferment beer with sugar, yeast, and water. She can ferment carbon dioxide, and they bioengineered bacteria that can eat carbon dioxide from the steel mill, so it doesn't go into the atmosphere, and convert it into ethanol, which you can turn into jet fuel. She saw the technology, had the courage to take the time and risk everything to build a business. They just flew, Virgin Atlantic just flew an airliner across the Atlantic powered on jet fuel made from pollution. And Jennifer's in her 60s. And so the story is important, because some of our entrepreneurs are 16 and some of them are 65. And some of them are career entrepreneurs born and wired that way. Others were executives, others were teachers, others never had a job, weren't educated in their entire life. They were former child soldiers. It doesn't matter. Like, we all have the capacity to have that courage. I think we just need to see that it's possible.
And you want to make sure that these actually have some chance of working too. I know that's part of your philosophy. Yeah. So, but you've supported a Canadian fusion company.
Yeah, General Fusion.
Are we going to be expecting fusion energy anytime soon?
That's a hard one. And so, so fusion, for those of us who don't know what that is, if you create hot fusion, you're recreating the center of the sun. If you can do it in a stable environment, you can have unlimited clean energy for the planet for millions of years, quite literally. Nobody's been able to do it, clearly. There's a couple companies working on it. There's a lot of governments. We think the most likely company in the world is General Fusion. They can get plasma to about 30 million degrees centigrade in a steady state environment. Once you hit 50 million, you get fusion. It's a really unique approach. In Vancouver, it's one of the coolest things you've ever seen.
And another cool thing is that you've supported a company in London that built a hydroponic farm 30 meters under the London streets in a former World War II air raid shelter.
Yeah, absolutely right. They're vacant. World War II bomb shelters, 150 feet under the streets of London, they're empty. Looked at that and said, well, food needs to be local, right? Turned it into a hydroponic farm.
It's amazing.
It's a credible business called Growing Underground. We work with the largest hydroponic farm in the world called Arrow Farms in New Jersey. It is about finding what 80% of the companies work, their solutions are already effective, and about 20%, if they can work, they'll change humanity, they'll bend history in the right direction, and so that's kind of the makeup of the portfolio.
Yeah. I gotta say, the thing that I love about hearing about the companies that you're working with, and the reason I was so stoked to be invited to be part of this, is that I think at least part of what our core mission is at Not Impossible is we don't want to solve all the world's problems. We know that we can't, but the stories that you're telling, the stories that we're telling, if we can we don't want to, and we're very, very specific about this word, we don't want to inspire people because it's me granting power to you. We want to remind you
that it's in there. And
provoke you to go, wait a second. If that guy from Colorado or that guy from Venice Beach can do it, or that company there, why can't I, right? And I think that's how, when you start to attack and address problems and you remind people that they have permission to go do it, it's not about degrees or diplomas or credentials. Now all of a sudden, you empower this like brain and this force that can go tackle things, because in our language, because they see something that's absurd and they're like, wait a second, I can go do that. And now all of a sudden you start this snowball.
Glad you connected us.
Yeah, and you have this incredible audience out here. I mean, it's just an unbelievable audience of doers and movers and shakers. What do you want from them? What would you say to them about your missions?
That's a big loaded question.
Yeah.
And she's given us the two. She said peace to you.
It's peace. It's peace. It's a victory
20 more
sign.
minutes.
You have 20 more minutes.
That does not mean
I got 10. You got 10.
Don't do that in Ireland.
All right, I love that. That's 20 more minutes. Okay.
There's a topic that's really hot right now and it's funny because I didn't know what the letters meant beforehand, but the social determinants of health, right?
Right.
And we were talking about this beforehand, but we launched a program about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, where we tackled hunger by using the one thing. We chose our one, and that was a homeless youth, and we did it in St. Louis in partnership with Express Scripts. And we tackled hunger with the one thing that every homeless youth, but specifically the group that we were working with, had, and that's a cell phone. Whether you're homeless, on the streets, you have a cell phone. And we texted them the ability to go pick up meals that were ready to eat via restaurants that already existed. That's now growing and scaling. To me, I would want everyone here and everybody at your conference to walk away with, how can you start to approach problems or absurdities by tackling things that are already accessible? It's not about building this new confounded crazy contraption, but what if you just used the thinking and the way that the world already exists? We just created the Uber or the Lyft or the Airbnb of hunger. But the sharing economy existed. Rather than filling a car seat or filling a bed, we just filled a mouth. And so I would just hope people would approach whatever problems you're trying to tackle with that perspective of, it doesn't have to be complicated and confangled. It could be very simple, and sometimes that's the one you have to kind of get out of your own way to do that.
Not Impossible, Unreasonable. Mick Ebeling, Daniel Epstein, thank you so much, both of you. Incredible conversation. Thank you.